provides a platform for that.
All right. So we're going to talk about the different focus areas that we've got. But before we do that, I just realized this morning I ironically threw on my Peace Garden State hoodie that I picked up in the Bismarck Airport last year. So totally not intended, but that, it just sits on the back of my chair. I wear it all the time. So we've got our research department, which is one of the best in the country and around the world at creating and evaluating uh, um, different research levels to make sure that we're protecting LGBTQ. So by educating the public on what does affect them, what suicidality looks like, what causes that, what and things like taking in the effects of conversion therapy and other negative aspects facing our community. Um, this has really allowed us to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going around the country with our community. We've also got our education department, which we educate adults and youth with LGBT competence in suicide prevention, risk detection, allyship, and then other educational programs online and in person. Similar to what we're doing right now. We've got folks that go around the country and speak at different speaking engagements and do very organized trainings and teaching teachers and guidance counselors. While Keygan is in the advocacy department, Keygan does a lot of work with teachers and educators around the country to make sure that they do have that competence. Then you've got what we do. Keygan and I are part of our very small but mighty advocacy team at Trevor, where we go around the country at the federal, state, and municipal level, fighting for protections against conversion therapy and making sure that lawmakers are educated on how to best create legislation to protect youth from suicide in general, whether that be in schools or any other aspect where we can protect them. We've got our 50 Bills, 50 States campaign, which is aimed at not only introducing but passing legislation to end conversion therapy in all 50 states. This has already been done in 20 states and the District of Columbia, and we're also working across the nation on our model school policy, which Keygan is in charge of, to make sure that every school district in the nation has got the best policies available to protect young people from the risk of suicidality. All right. And speaking of our research, here's a lot of it. So 40% of young queer respondents seriously considered attempting suicide in the past 12 months, and more than half of transgender and non-binary youth have seriously considered suicide. 68% of LGBT youth reported symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder in the past 2 weeks, including more than 3 in 4 transgender and non-binary youth. 48% of youth reported engaging in self-harm in the last 12 months. And once again, 3 in 4 transgender and non-binary youth were subject to this. And 46% of youth report that they wanted psychological or emotional counseling from a mental health professional, but were unable to receive that in the last 12 months, which is tragic. And that is something that doesn't just affect our community, but the lack of mental health resources in this country is something that we should all be talking and addressing in our individual communities. 10% of LGBT youth reported undergoing conversion therapy, with 78% reporting that it occurred while they were under 18. So that's a huge increase in people reporting it from the year before, and we believe that is because of advocates like ourselves and folks like you talking about conversion therapy over the course of the last few years, and people actually knowing what it is and how it's happening, and knowing that that's what's happening to it. It's hard to report something if you didn't know that was what was being done to you. Uh-oh. 61% of transgender and non-binary youth reported being prevented or discouraged from using a bathroom that corresponds with their gender identity. And I'm sure over the last 5 or 6 years, all of you seeing the debates and the abusive legislation that's going on, and how that not only affects their not being able to do this, but all those other aspects of what goes into suicidality in youth. 1 in 3 youth reported that they had been physically threatened or harmed in their lifetime due to their identity. 86% of queer youth said that recent politics have negatively impacted their well-being. Not only we'll talk a bit about that, hopefully more in the question and answer session, but not just politics. I think that even COVID-19 has become political, which probably has a lot to do with those current affairs stats.
So speaking of which, thanks for that nice
Right.
transition, Troy. You know, right now at the top of a lot of the areas of the country, COVID-19 is what we're all talking about. I mean, it's the reason why Troy and I aren't there right now.
Right.
And so, you know, what has this looked like in our LGBTQ youth? Well, we know that this causes the need to seek, potentially the need to seek medical attention in unsupportive spaces. So if you, and this goes for both physical and mental health. So if folks are, you know, in their areas that may not be as supportive and they get sick, right now is not a time where we want to delay going to a doctor if one is sick in showing symptoms that are similar to COVID. And so instead of just being able to, you know, stay at home and write it out, LGBTQ folks are going to, you know, doctors that may or may not be supportive just in order to make sure that they're safe. In addition, if a lot of students receive mental health support in schools, and if that was their way of getting supportive space, if they're not able to receive that same type of care now being at home and doing like remote learning and things like that, that can cause problems. The generalized uncertainty about the future, again, this is everyone, but this is just, it's a compounding issue. All of these are compounding issues on top of our LGBTQ youth who are already stressed out by a lot of other things. There's housing instability. We know that LGBTQ youth have a higher rate of homelessness due to several different factors. And right now, with the economic issues that are happening as a result of COVID, that again is increased. And then we have all this like just violent imagery happening right now, which is also bumping up the anxiety. Even more important for our youth is the physical distancing that's happening. And we always want to say physical distancing and not social distancing, because we are physically distant right now, but as we can see here in this space, we can be social together and still have community and support. But it's important to facilitate that. And so for a lot of our LGBTQ youth, you know, schools are doing what they can to create structure around learning, but they also need to start to consider how they build structure around student groups as well, and really focus in on extracurriculars that help the mental health and well-being of our young people, including things like GSAs. And then there are, you know, the unintended negative consequences related to being confined to an environment that may be unsupportive. So if LGBTQ youth are in homes that their parents either don't know they're LGBTQ or don't support the fact that they're LGBTQ, that, you know, can increase a space of mental unrest and even some situations more abusive spaces. So we've shared a lot about like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of negative things happening here, and like what, you know, is there any hope for this? And the answer is yes, of course there is. There's a lot of ways that anyone can help. And the first, and I'm going to turn this over to Troy, is to join the advocacy efforts that are helping to protect young LGBTQ people.
Right. As I mentioned earlier, we work to protect youth from conversion therapy around the country, and including right there in North Dakota, we're working with Barry and others to make sure that those protections do come in the hopefully very near future. As I said, Keygan works on school suicide prevention around the country, which is something that North Dakota is not fully up to speed on. So if anybody wants to help out there, Keygan is more than willing to take all your emails and get you plugged in. Collecting LGBTQ data. So on that survey I mentioned earlier, all those statistics that we were coming from. And Keygan, please correct me if I'm wrong here. I believe it was close to 40,000, 36,000 respondents. So we use social media to very effectively targeted and paid advertising to make sure that we're getting the biggest swath of queer youth answering these questions. So the collection of that data is very important, and I have no idea how you can help with that, but I'm sure Keygan will tell you in a second because that's not my department.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the ways is when our survey comes out, we do the data that you saw today came from our 2020 national survey. So when our 2021 survey comes around, there will be all sorts of like Facebook and Twitter and other social media advertisements, and you're welcome to share those with all the LGBTQ youth that you know, and we can definitely hook you in with all of that. The other part about LGBTQ data is that we shouldn't be the only ones collecting it, and so making sure that whenever we're doing any type of research, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's about housing or about diabetes or about income, it doesn't matter. Whatever the research is, we should also be asking people's sexual orientation and gender identity in the demographics section. And so that's something that anyone can do at any job. If your job is putting out a survey, and an employee survey, a consumer survey, if you're a researcher and doing that, any of those spaces, if we're asking that question, we're going to get more information about LGBTQ youth. LGBTQ people, and then if it's youth-based, it's going to be LGBTQ youth, which is super important. We love the fact that we are able to do this in-house research, but we want more people to do all sorts of kinds of research with it.
Awesome. And then 988, I don't know, Keygan mentioned it briefly earlier, but 988 is one of our proudest moments and one of the most exciting things that we believe has happened for especially LGBTQ youth, but suicidality in general, for folks that are suffering from any sort of suicidal ideation around the country. We just played a key role in helping to pass legislation that will create a national suicide prevention hotline. So it's a designated number, just like 911, which will be 988. This won't go into effect for 2 years, but approximately 2 years. They're going to figure out how to do it, and then we'll get it working. But the legislation is there, the funding is there, and we are excited that shortly people will be able to dial 988 just like 911. We would love for you all to follow the progress of that hotline and be able to help spread the word when it happens. I think my niece the other day asked what this was, and we realized talking to her that in 50 years, people are going to be looking at 988 the same way they do 911, and they won't realize we didn't have it. And it will be such an impactful way of saving lives around the country. So then we also oppose anti-LGBTQ legislation. So I don't know how many folks in North Dakota, and I know there are people from all around the country that are on this call or on this at this virtual conference, as opposed to just those that we could speak to in person. But anti-LGBT legislation happens in a lot of states, especially your neighbor to the south, which had some pretty bad legislation last year. That just keep an eye on it, and when that pops up, we will send out action alerts. And if you sign up through our if you go to thetrevorproject.org and 50 Bills 50 states, you can sign up for our action alerts, and we will be able to send those directly to you. So, and then you can help stop that, especially if it happens in North Dakota this coming year, which we really hope it does not.
There are a lot of other ways you can help support LGBTQ youth. Obviously, by being at this conference, you're educating yourself and others about mental health and such. If you're an ally to the LGBTQ community and not LGBTQ yourself, that's even I love that so much, because allies can educate more allies. It should not be left up to LGBTQ folks to just do that education, although we're happy to do it. You can volunteer at the Trevor Project if you're interested in crisis services in particular. Our Lifeline and Digital are all now remote. It used to be for Lifeline, you had to be in either New York or LA. A positive came out of COVID on that one, and now we have volunteers all across the country. on the Lifeline, and then we also have them working digital. We recently just got our first Hawaii Lifeline person, so that's really exciting too. And then you can find all the information on how to volunteer again on our website. Public education and storytelling matters. I cannot emphasize this enough. Stories about your own experiences, stories about youth experiences, lifting those voices up, whether that's through op-eds or testimony or having movie nights. Over here to the right of the screen, there's Boy Erased, which is a great movie to start a conversation around conversion therapy. But there are a ton of LGBTQ movies out there doing that, speaking with churches, all of those different things. We know that having a one supportive adult in a young LGBTQ young person's life lowers the risk of suicidal ideation by 40%. One supportive adult lowers it by 40%. That's huge. And just imagine what these youth will feel if there's multiple supportive adults around them. So if you are LGBTs, sharing your story helps show that these youth are not alone and that you have that support. If you are an ally, speaking up about LGBTQ issues, helping run these events, also helps to show those youth that you're supportive and you can be that person that lowers their risk of suicide by 40%. And that goes into that space of being a safe place for LGBTQ people in your community. Pronouns are a great way to start. Really amazing moment this year on our national survey showed that if people's pronouns were respected, it lowered the rates. I think it was, what was it, like 18%, Troy? Is that right? Something
yeah,
like that.
Around there.
So like correct pronouns is suicide prevention. Like how cool is that? It's so simple. It's so simple. So there are multiple ways, and we're happy to talk more about any of them and talk about any of the stats or any of our services. And so now we're going to open. Oh, sorry, I forgot I have one more slide on here. Some really cool resources is, of course, our national survey, which I will put all of these in the chat box after I X out of the presentation. But our national survey on youth mental health is a really, really great. This, again, our second annual one came out this year. Some really interesting stats there. And then we also have some, due to the political things that are happening in the world right now, we've put out these guides for youth about taking action, particularly around protesting and other things, how to do that safely, both in general, but also in the time of COVID. And then our Supporting Black LGBT Youth Mental Health report also has some really cool and helpful resources as well. So there's a ton of stuff on our website, and that we can share a lot of things all day long, but we want to turn it over to you all for any questions that we can kind of focus in our broader knowledge on.
Where are we doing?
All right,
Are the questions going to be in the chat box, or
we have a comment I placed there when you were referring to the anti-LGBTQ legislation. There is discussion that bills such as has occurred in South Dakota are in the works. We don't know names or where it might be coming from, but I think it's good to be alert to the possibility. And then there was one question: are we looking at any proactive legislation for North Dakota? That's coming from Mark. I would just respond to that by saying, for the last 5 sessions, there has been a bill to add sexual orientation, gender identity to the North Dakota human rights law. It has failed every time. I'm going to guess that there will be an attempt to introduce that again in the legislature, but without substantial change in the people in the seats. We're not particularly positive about the outcome. But is there anything particular as a follow-up, Mark, that you might have in mind in terms of proactive?
No, and I'm aware of that one. That is a significant challenge. Obviously, every year we try to go up against. Part of the reason I thought of it is because we've got at YouthWorks, we've been doing some advocacy work for homeless youth, and we've got about 4 or 5 legislative points that we plan on bringing to the state legislature this next year that are not involving funding. And so I just thought it would be good, maybe even if there's a brainstorm of what might be something that's more youth focused, and that might, we all know about the political climate in North Dakota, so something that might feel more approachable, so that we can, start getting some wins.
Thank you. Troy or Keygan, could you talk at all about where you've seen some real effective, proactive advocacy working on the legislative side, and some tips on what would be good ways? We have a great group of activists in this room right now that I think are just waiting to become engaged and have been engaged. So
I think the most important thing you can do is, introducing legislation can be a mixed bag. In some states, things have moved quickly, but most of the time it takes a sustained public education effort, and becoming volunteers or spreading the word or helping with the education efforts that Barry and his organization are doing, or other organizations around North Dakota, is the most important thing you can do, because before you introduce this legislation, it's vital that you've got the infrastructure and the groundwork to make sure that you can give support to the lawmakers that want to do it, and show the lawmakers that don't want to do it that support is there. So never have we had successful legislation without that groundswell of grassroots movement. And it's folks like Barry and the human rights, the North Dakota Human Rights Commission that are coalition, I'm sorry, Barry, that are doing that work on the ground, that need your support, either volunteering, giving them the helping them raise the funding to do that. That's where the magic happens. You can also look at municipal work. Talk to Barry about the different municipalities around North Dakota that may be able to introduce bans on conversion therapy or protections against discrimination in those individual jurisdictions. So look at your own home, not just the state of North Dakota or the federal government. That small town in North Dakota that you live in, or that big city in North Dakota that you live in, may be able to pass these protections. And that's what state lawmakers are looking for. And that's what federal lawmakers are looking for, to see that there really is that momentum on the ground. Keygan, did you want to add anything there?
I was looking at Kip's comment in the chat about, do you think it's possible in North Dakota to enact legislation protecting youth from conversion therapy when we spent 10 plus years trying to add language to protect folks from sexual orientation and gender identity? And so I want to comment 2 things on that. And that is, one, I think it's possible to protect LGBTQ youth from conversion therapy, but maybe not through the legislature. There's other regulatory actions. There's the municipal bans that Troy mentioned. Again, all those little pieces add up. And if you can start to make more of those happen, then you can then consider state legislation after that. If you look at a state like Florida as a really good example of this, there's very little there's like no state protection there with conversion therapy. However, there are so many municipalities that are protected that it almost feels like the entire state of Florida is protected at this point, just because it's like they've gotten different counties on board and different cities on board, even like little villages. You're just like, okay, so overall, more and more youth are protected from these things, but it's not a statewide ban. So you have to kind of navigate that space. Y'all have a very interesting legislative policy in North Dakota, and so we have to be mindful of things like legislative intent and other things, and so there is work to be done, and plenty of it. But figuring out where to guide that, I think, is important. I also want to point out with the spending the 10 years on trying to get language added, that honestly, this year you might have a better shot from a national perspective. With the and I think later today there's going to be more conversation about this in the Know Your Rights session with Ming and us. But with the Bostic court judgment coming down and saying that sex actually covers sexual orientation and gender identity in employment non-discrimination, it kind of and coming from a very conservative judge as well, I think really helps the case and helps the argument there. So can we provide some more logic and reasoning from that angle? I think to give those protections is really helpful.
Keygan, this is Mark. Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Please.
When you said that, it made me think about the policy versus the legislation. Made me think about insurance companies. Do we know if that is an approved therapy for Medicaid or for other? Do you guys know the answer to that? And if it is approved, that would certainly be one of the potential.
It is not. And the reason it is not is, well, there's two levels. We've got federal legislation aimed at making sure it can't be. This is not a legitimate practice. There is no medical body that accepts it. So therefore, there's no way to code it through Medicare or any other insurance system. However, there are crafty, devious, innovative practitioners out there that what they'll do is they'll code it under anxiety or under whatever their method of coding it is. So it makes it more difficult. But we do have legislation before Congress that we are working towards passing federally that would ban this practice from being covered by Medicare or Medicaid. And therefore, if they were caught doing so, if there was a report made by, let's say, a parent or a youth found out that this snake oil and quackery of conversion therapy was wrong, where they thought it was real before, and yet the therapist was charging it to their insurance via some anxiety code, they would be able to report that therapist would be fined and potentially lose their license. So long answer, yes, there are ways to protect them from it. Short answer, no, there's no way to code it. So I don't know that I helped answer your question, except that it's ambiguous and we're trying to ban it no matter what.
And when it comes to the regulatory actions, it's literally the board of licensures that we're targeting. It's getting them to basically say that, if found, that they will, again, either fine or revoke licensure from these folks that are doing it. And so Virginia is a really good example of this, where this was really successful prior to legislation. So it was, the Board of Psychology, the Board of Nursing, there was like 3 or 4 boards that passed it first. And then when we went to pass the legislation in Virginia, we had the people from the boards on board with it, coming into the legislature and saying, we've already banned this practice from our practitioners. Like, there's no reason for this to not be in law. And so again, it's how do you build those levels of support and while you're doing that, protect youth.
Right.
I just to quickly insert, I'm just going to mention that you will, as a participant at the summit, be receiving an email talking about the attempts of doing this through regulation, just like what Keygan said. Right now, the North Dakota Board of Social Work Examiners has inserted language in both their ethics and their regulatory rules that would, in fact, do exactly what we want to see happen here. And they're taking comment until November 9th. And so you will be getting the information about how to contact the board of the Board of Social Work Examiners to let them know what you think the right thing is to do. And 3 other professional associations have been identified as asking them to also create those kinds of administrative rules. So it is a work in progress. We can't believe how long it's taken. When Keygan and Troy were here last October, they began talking about this with Representative Josh and Liz Lose, and they've been working on it ever since. And so it takes a really long time, but it is at a position now where public input is really important. So that information will be coming out. I'm going to check now. Beth asked, can conversion therapy be a one-on-one or is it a live-in like drug treatment?
Both, yes, and unfortunately, you see it as both. And I think the live-in space is a little bit ambiguous too nowadays because, again, as Troy has mentioned, having tricky coding systems, there's also some aspects of other treatments that, particularly in faith-based counseling, you see this a lot more frequently where there's other issues that the person is facing, you know, whether that's an addiction issue, whether that's a anxiety or depression issue, whatever it might be. And if they are in this like intensive inpatient space, they're being asked to, you know, convert, you know, and not be gay, you know, ex-gay kind of moment too. So you see those spaces pop up every now and again. There's a few organizations that are a little bit more notorious for that than others. So yes, it can, but it can also be a one-on-one therapist session, just, you know, just like anything else. So yeah,
Keygan's absolutely right, but just to hammer it down a little bit more, quote unquote conversion therapy or reparative therapy or whatever they want to call it, this is not real. This is not a legitimate practice that's not taught in any legitimate school of counseling, school of social work, medical school. It's just not real. So what is important to remember is we call it conversion therapy because that's the language that's understood by the rest of the world. But what it's actually legally called is sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts. So this covers any attempt to do so. So the legislation that we pass can only ban this from licensed practitioners who, as Keygan said, are regulated by some state medical board, some authority. What's harder to get into, unless you're talking about consumer fraud, which I'll go into in a second if you want me to, but these practices range from a licensed clinical counselor who is using this practice that's outside the best practices of their profession to sit down and have talk therapy with somebody. I mean, there are more extreme cases where physical aversion therapy and things are done where they actually do some physical or in many cases abusive emotional things where they make them look at things like pornography and other things, but that's more rare. What happens often that people don't think about, this includes pastoral care. If you've got pastors, we can't regulate pastoral care. This is out, I mean, that's a First Amendment issue unless they're charging money. But it includes your preacher, your priest, or your rabbi sitting down and telling you that there's something fundamentally wrong with who this young person is. So the reason that we sound like we're dancing around an issue when we talk about it is because there's no set practice of this. Once again, it's snake oil. I mean, it's them trying to sell a false bill of goods. And the way that we can combat some of it that we're doing in a one-off piecemeal fashion, not we as a greater movement of legal minds, is to sue for consumer fraud against practitioners who are doing this and charging money for it. So if you're telling somebody that if you give them $5,000 and send your kid to this camp and they're going to send them back to you and they're straight, or they're going to change their gender identity somehow, that's fraud. I mean, they just can't do it. It's not possible. So that's another legal aspect to go after it from. But yeah, it's hard to exactly explain or code or anything else something that doesn't exist except in the minds of people that want to hurt children.
Thank you.
I hope that answers whatever question I was just answering that I forgot, kind of like Joe Biden did when Trump was shooting questions at him the other night.
That was very insightful because my experience was at the the beginning of a conversion therapy at a rogue evangelical pastor's hands, right? And
Right.
so that's the part that in my testimony to this board, when I come forward with it, that Barry was talking about, I'm going to be including that they can't. And please answer this question. So I have one. So this is Richard Rockefeller, NDHRC board member. I thank you. What a very comprehensive, beautiful presentation. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing. Thank you for supporting the NDHRC. So one of the things I have is, one, haven't the founders, I don't know the names of them, but the founders of this therapy, haven't they actually recanted? I mean, I was reading a story about 2 years ago where the founders of this ideology and this therapy actually recanted their that it doesn't work. It actually came out, it doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah, well, sort of. So you have to know that there's multiple different groups that have been running this, and there are multiple different, like, oftentimes we're only talking about Christian organizations that are running this, and I use that term very loosely in that moment, but it's not just in Christianity, and I think that that's very, very important to point out. Like, we can see this in other communities and cultures as well, and so we have to be wary of just conflating this issue to just that. Also, there are some secular practitioners, right, that are doing these practices.
The largest one we've ever shut down was actually a Orthodox Jewish organization. Go ahead, Keygan. I apologize.
Yeah, so that's the first thing that I want to point out with that. But yes, there have been many kind of the powers that be of these larger organizations that have come out, and oftentimes have come out literally, and said that this was not actually possible, and I was just repressing my sexuality.
Yeah, they were expressing their own shame, right?
Yeah.
Keygan's absolutely 100%. Yes, a lot of like the Exodus International folks have said it's not real. Many leaders, quote unquote, in the, once again, I wish I had quotations that I could put in the air everywhere, but the ex-gay movement, many of them have now left, and they're now married to members of their own sex. I mean, they came out and admitted that it was abusive, but the beginnings of this were actually before these untrained people started doing these things. It came from medical professionals, and so yes, they have disavowed it in the DSM. Homosexuality is no longer considered some sort of mental illness, and hasn't been since before most of us were born. Trans status, since in I think most of most of Keygan's adult life has been accepted as what it is, as a person and who they are. So as far as who originally this,
when trans people finally got our
is it 95 or 2005?
DSM-5.
Keygan. DSM-5. So what I'm basically, and this is a very pedantic point, but yes, the people that originated it, medical practitioners, have disavowed it. And this movement of untrained folks and fringe groups came out of the fact that actual medical professionals said this isn't real. So I think what you were asking about was this current movement of quackery, and Keygan was absolutely right. Yeah, some of them have, some of them haven't, but the originators of it, yes, have all disavowed it.
And the other, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to address Kip's comment in the chat. Very, very important. Yes, and I think tomorrow our colleague Sam is going to be talking more about conversion therapy and their own story. And one of the things that they always say over and over is that parents are oftentimes putting kids into conversion therapy because that's what they think is best for their kid, because they're doing it out of love, and they don't know that it's not possible, and they don't know that it's that it can have such negative consequences on the young people. And so, yeah, I'm one to always go after practitioners and really go after practitioners over and over, but not the parents. We want to educate the parents, and really also we want to make sure the parents have resources. This is one of the biggest things, and I think Kip, you actually asked about this earlier, up further in the chat, about how do we work to educate parents, and really it's about providing resources. It's about providing parents with other parents too.
Right.
That's like one of the biggest things. One of the one of the best things one of the best parts of the LGBTQ movement that has ever come about, in my opinion, is PFLAG. The Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and now they're more inclusive of that title, but PFLAG is for short. And parents talking to other parents and realizing that it's okay for their kids to be LGBTQ is so important. I work with a youth chorus here in Washington, D.C. that it's an LGBTQ youth chorus, and while it's really nice for the kids to have their community together and to have that space together, some of the most amazing work that I've seen have actually come from the parents who every Saturday are waiting for their kids to get done with rehearsal, and they're just sitting there and talking, and getting to know one another and talking about their kids. And you can see the pride that's coming out in these parents over their children, and they have this joint community together of LGBTQ parents. And so it's just, I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do, is connect LGBTQ parents with other LGBTQ parents, and get them to see that, like, it's okay. I know my dad, I grew up in rural Ohio, in the middle of a cornfield. So like, when I came out, my dad was like, I have no idea. And I connected him in with a few people, and I was like, here, I will educate you, but like there's a limit to my like what I'm gonna do. But now he's become that person. And there have been several trans kids that have come out in my hometown area who their parents have reached out to my dad, and that has been the biggest amount of growth for those parents. And so, yeah, we provide them the resources, we provide them education and statistics and all the things that we can. But I think sometimes that one-on-one connection with another person who has the same experience is the better thing that we can do.
We have gotten the 10-minute warning, and I see there's a lot of messages in our chat box. So I'm going to go to Sarah, who said getting involved in your community is important. If I may share the momentum from last year, I could go over the steps we talked about, and I'm going to really kind of steer this really quickly because we have a lot of messages. I want to try to get through as many as I can. So Sarah.
Yeah, I was like, Barry, if you need to skip me, that's fine. But with Magic City Equality especially becoming quite the momentum in our area, and then of course we're looking at incorporating in all that jazz in North Dakota. Well, one thing that I'm going to challenge every single person on this feed, especially and through the next a day and a half, is we need to connect. I know that Zoom especially, and the fact that we are virtual, shows that there are no bounds. One of the things is we only lost by 5 votes. And this is where I really am going to be on my soapbox as an ally, is the fact that the last legislative, nobody knew about it until we saw on the news, literally children at that podium reliving their trauma. And again, as I said in Minot, when the city council, I mean, obviously that is a local, that was a local, but again, we are forcing our LGBTQIA plus community to go through their trauma in order for legislation to be passed. And I get that the stories are powerful, but I do think that as allies and as people, if we could gain momentum to have more of a, this is happening right now, and maybe, I mean, people are paying to be a part of these Zooms. Imagine how many people would participate just connecting for free before we all go to Bismarck is my main goal. Because like I said, 5 votes, that's it. We lost by 5. So again, that's my challenge to the HRC, is to, again, instead of having these pop up and not have anybody know about it, to, again, let's challenge and let's build that momentum to where it needs to be.
Randomly on what you were just speaking of, and I think everybody probably knows, but what you're talking about, but I remember seeing this go now. There was national, at least in the LGBTQ press, and your city councilor there in Minot, Carrie Evans,
Correct.
is an old friend of mine who was the executive director of Equality Maryland a decade ago. And I just was so confused by seeing her there and going, I have to be wrong. This cannot be the same person. And sure enough, my old friends from right there in Minot. Anyway, I'm sorry. That was just a personal non sequitur of see, how small of a world this is.
Yeah, I don't know if any. Hi, this is Jordan Lattiser. I'm one of 4 of executive directors of Magic City Equality. I don't know if many are aware or know what we're kind of talking about, but what happened was that Magic City Equality actually wrote a proclamation and handed it into the city council, and Alderwoman Carrie Evans, who's the first ever openly lesbian to sit on that council, pushed that with us. And so it happened. It was great. It was historical. And then everybody out of the woodwork who was against, who continued to suppress the LGBTQ2 plus community, decided to come out and said that it was about a flag. It wasn't about a flag. And when Magic City Equality actually released a statement at that second meeting, we called out their bigotry point blank. The reason why we were not there at the first meeting is because we actually received a death threat hours before we were supposed to go to that first meeting. And so there is an ongoing investigation behind that, where we have a case investigator. They are doing research, and they got warrants for the IP address as well as the email address. So it's just ongoing. Kind of piggybacking what Sarah was saying is that Magic City Equality, including NDHRC and working with Barry as well a lot, one of the biggest things that our biggest vocal has been is that we cannot change the system without allies, point blank. We need our allies to back us as well, because people have tried to silence us for such a long time. And with Magic City Equality, we have been very vocal. Barry, would you agree? We've been very vocal with a lot of things, and we have actually called out the GOP on Fox, on the Fox stations here and everything as well, and told them that their language was not only non-inclusive, but it was also bigotry as well. And it's because of people like this that our system is not changing. And I know our promise with NDHRC as well as Barry as well was that we will carry on this torch with them, making sure that this passes and making sure that there are protections for the LGBTQ2 plus community as well. And a couple of other things, I don't know if the Trevor Project, Keygan, I don't know if you were familiar with this as well, but as of recently, James, I would say about 3 months ago, we were actually in the Turtle Mountain Ban of Chippewas, and we actually assisted with changing that law. The Turtle Mountain Ban of Chippewas is the first ever reservation in the state of North Dakota to recognize same-sex marriage. And it was Magic City Equality, as well as us, with the assistance of people from the tribe, that actually made that work and changed that tribal law. And I was one of the ones that were that spoke for that. And during that time, people who did not like that sat there and tried ridiculing me in the middle of my speech, but it continued forward. It just shows that we just need one voice, not necessarily just one voice, but we need one person, in a sense, an ally, somebody under the LGBTQ2 plus, to stand up and say that this is enough. And I think we are in an era right now that we are all banding together, and I feel that that is monumental to the fact where I don't think that has happened in a very long time. And with the recognition that Minus has been seen, and the seminar from, we have got a message from Australia, South Africa, Out Magazine, The Advocate, other things, that people are starting to tune into North Dakota. And I think that's very amazing. I think it's because not only of all of everybody that's in part of this conversation right now, but everybody who supports the LGBTQ2 plus communities.
Well, this is something that Troy and I took away from last year. And I think this is a really great place to end as well. Thank you for sharing all that. But we found so much passion and so much energy in North Dakota that we came back to DC and our national partners, and we're like, what have you all been doing? Why aren't you in North Dakota doing this work? Because seriously, y'all are ready for some change, and y'all have the energy, and it's amazing. I still have yet to find another state that has had so much follow up as North Dakota has had with us. And you know, we travel a lot, so like or virtually travel nowadays. But I think that you're absolutely correct. Just keep pushing, keep telling your story, keep rallying the allies around you. You're ready for change, and it's happening. So thank you all for letting us be a part of that, and let us know in the future how we can assist you in any further ways.
That's beautiful, Keygan. Thank you so much for that. We are fairly self-deprecating here, and I don't think we realize the power. And Jordan, thank you for acknowledging that. Thank you for what you've observed and can feed back to us. I think we're getting close to the end of our session, so that is really a great thing that should be allowed to stand. I just want to mention to those in the room that North Dakota Human Rights Coalition will have a coordinator at the legislative session again starting in January, who will be working with the legislators and be bringing forward the proactive legislation that Mark talked about, as well as being really alert to any bad bills that are coming up. But we are all in this room, we're the troops that are going to be doing this. It's not a person there doing it. It's that they need to be calling on people that are talking to their legislators and saying what we want to see change in our states. So thank you. We've got great, and then we always talk about that we all know 10 people in addition to those in this room. So the expansion that we can have and the reach can be great. Anything else, Troy and Keygan? I don't see any other questions in the chat room, but we're not also being shut down, so we'll take every advantage we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think Keygan and I are more than willing to stay on for a while if anybody wants to continue to ask more questions. I hate to speak for Keygan because they might actually have something to do right now, but I just did. So, but no, I think this has been great.
Excellent. Well, I know that the next item is really lunch, which you know, we're not going anywhere for lunch. But any other last minute questions or that you would like? Okay, we're getting closed in 12 seconds. Okay. We don't have the option. So thank you all for being here. Okay. Thanks, Keygan and Troy.
To keep us all on time into the breakout.
How did it? I was actually shy.
That's his job. Good job, Alex.
Right?
It's supposed to give you a minute. They only give you like what, 15 seconds?
Yeah.
Like literally. Yeah, it was like the zip chats and breakouts. It was like, oh.
So Alex, I didn't have a chance to stop the recording. Can you let me back in there so I can record it and save it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Barry?
Yes.
I think it will be automatically recording or saved.
Oh.
I did the same thing.
Okay.
That's true.
Okay, thank you. I just
just
suddenly, when I saw this 13-second warning, I thought I should click. Boom, we're done.
Oh yeah, it is recording still. Somebody's recording.
I think it looks like it's Barry from the participant list.
Say what?
Oh yeah, Barry.
Your recording is still going, so you know, the final video might show some of this interaction in the main room, I think.
Okay, so how do I go in and stop it?
Just hit the record button again, and it should say stop recording or pause. Just stop it.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.